If one day the people who once called you family sit in silence as you're being disrespected, smile, because that's when the truth is about to reveal itself. The funeral of Henry Walker took place on a gray morning. Light rain tapped gently against the stained glass windows of the old church, each drop echoing the heaviness in Eleanor's chest. The woman who had stood by his side for over 40 years held a black hand-embroidered handkerchief, the same one she had sewn on their wedding day. No one knew a quiet storm was beginning inside her. In the front row, Michael, her only son, held the hand of his wife Sophie. Their faces were calm, but in their eyes lingered a silent anticipation. Henry had been a man of wealth contracts and million-dollar skyscrapers. And today, all of it would be divided piece by piece. After the ceremony, the family gathered at the law office of Arthur Grant. The room was wide, washed in white light, gleaming off the oak table. Each person took their seat, thoughts whispering beneath the surface. Michael leaned back, certain that as the only heir, most of the estate would be his. Sophie lifted her chin, a faint smile, forming already tasting victory. Eleanor rested her fingers on her pearl necklace. No expectation, no resentment, only a quiet sadness reflected in her eyes. Arthur opened the folder, his voice deep and deliberate. According to the last will and testament of Mr. Henry Walker, dated February 14th, notarized and legally binding, the room fell still. Pages rustled softly. Then came the words that sliced through the silence. I, Henry Walker, leave the penthouse at Park Avenue, in all shares of Walker Holdings, to my son Michael Walker and his wife Sophie Walker. Michael's lips curved into a smile. Sophie squeezed his hand, pride flickering in her eyes. But then Arthur paused, glancing toward Eleanor. And to my wife, Eleanor Grace Walker, I leave the old farm in Vermont. The air froze. Sophie let out a small laugh, half pity, half mockery. Michael looked at his mother, words caught behind guilt. A woman who had shared a lifetime with her husband, now handed nothing but an abandoned farm. Eleanor said nothing. She simply nodded and accepted the final envelope Arthur slid across the table, a letter in Henry's handwriting. The lawyer's voice softened. He asked that you read it alone. That night, the penthouse felt hollow. Rain drummed against the window city lights, blurred by mist. Eleanor sat at the wooden desk, opening the envelope with trembling hands. Henry's handwriting filled the page, firm yet tender. My love, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I know you've lived among people who understand wealth, but few who understand freedom. Don't sell the farm, Eleanor. Go there and find the freedom you deserve. She laid the letter down, eyes drifting across the room, once a home, now only echoes of what was. Every photograph on the wall seemed to whisper the same truth: it's time to leave. At midnight, she stood by the window, gazing at the glittering city, the empire they had built together. But instead of pride, she felt suffocated. Those lights no longer warmed her heart. They only mirrored her solitude. She reached for an old suitcase, packing a few clothes, the black embroidered handkerchief, and Henry's letter. Before walking out, she looked around one last time and whispered, "Don't worry, Henry, I won't sell it. I'll go, and I'll find what you left for me." The sound of the closing door echoed like the end of a chapter and the beginning of another. Outside, fog hung low over the streets. The car rolled north toward Vermont, where autumn leaves painted the hills in gold. Eleanor rested her head against the window, a faint light glimmering in her eyes. She murmured, maybe freedom isn't where we're given things, but where we dare to go. That night, for the first time in years, she slept soundly, not because she was at peace, but because her heart finally knew where it was heading. The road narrowed as Eleanor crossed into Vermont, winding through hills painted in copper and gold. Autumn had arrived early here. Crisp air, soft mist, rising from the fields and leaves, whispering stories of things once lost and now found. The GPS lost its signal miles ago, leaving only instinct and memory to guide her. At the end of a gravel path stood the farm Henry had left behind, or perhaps had chosen for her. The farmhouse looked weary, as if time itself had paused mid-sigh. The paint was chipped, The porch slanted, and ivy climbed stubbornly across the beams. Yet in that stillness, there was a strange welcome, the kind that didn't need words. Eleanor parked the car, stepped out, and inhaled deeply. The air smelled of earth and rain, of apples ripening somewhere nearby. She turned the old brass doorknob, its chill pressing against her palm, and pushed the door open. Dust danced in the sunlight, streaming through cracked shutters. Every step echoed softly, like a conversation between past and present. The furniture was covered in white sheets, ghostly silhouettes of a life once lived. Cobwebs glimmered in the corners, fragile and untouched. She walked through each room, tracing her fingers along the walls. Despite the decay, there was beauty here, not in luxury, but in truth. When she reached the back porch, her eyes caught a sight that made her heart tighten. The apple orchard, still standing, still blooming. Branches, heavy with fruit, swayed gently in the breeze, petals scattered like snow across the grass. Henry had planted those trees decades ago, before their first winter. "So you'll never run out of something sweet," he'd told her. Eleanor smiled through tears. Maybe this wasn't abandonment. Maybe it was a gift waiting for her to notice. Inside the study, she found shelves lined with old ledgers and faded photographs. A framed picture of their younger selves, Henry's arm around her shoulders, both laughing at something behind the camera. The glass was cracked, but the joy was intact. Then as she brushed away a layer of dust from the far wall, her knuckles tapped something hollow. A sound that didn't belong. She leaned closer. The panel was slightly uneven. Behind it, a faint outline. A hidden door. Heart pounding, Eleanor pressed her fingers against the edge until the panel gave way, revealing a small iron safe built into the wall. A keyhole glinted under the dim light. She reached into her coat pocket, the same pocket where Henry's letter rested, and pulled out the small brass key he'd left attached to it. Her hands trembled as she slid it in. The lock clicked. Inside lay not memories, but evidence of foresight. Stacks of neatly labeled folders, property titles, equity shares, land, lease agreements, and a leather-bound book embossed with her name. And at the bottom, a thick envelope marked savings. $8,000, thousand. Eleanor gasped. Tears welled up again, not of greed, but of understanding. Henry hadn't left her behind. He had built her freedom. Underneath the folders, she noticed one more thing. A folded letter, sealed with the same wax crest as the first. She opened it gently, afraid the paper might crumble. Eleanor, this farm is more than land. It's your foundation. These are the roots of your freedom. Don't let anyone take them from you. Her vision blurred. The words swam, but the message was clear. He had known the world might one day test her, doubt her worth, question her strength. So he had written the answer long before she would need it. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, whispering through quiet sobs. You always knew, didn't you, that I'd need to find myself again? She sat by the open safe, surrounded by dust and secrets, and for the first time in years, she felt seen. The sun dipped lower streaks of gold, spilling across the orchard outside. She walked out, closing the door behind her, the key warm in her hand. Standing under the apple trees, she let the wind tangle through her hair. In that moment, she realized Henry hadn't given her a farm. He had given her a beginning, and beginnings, she thought, are never forgotten. Back in New York, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm ambition, in every honk greed, in every deal signed before midnight. In a glass-walled apartment, overlooking the skyline, Sophie sat at the dining table, her fingers drumming against her tablet. Eyes sharp as if cutting through numbers or people. Michael walked in quietly, loosening his tie. The shadows under his eyes had deepened these past months. Debt collectors called more than his friends did now. He poured himself a drink, but Sophie didn't look up. Michael, she said flatly, scrolling through property records. Something doesn't add up. He sighed. Sophie, not this again. Don't be naive. She turned the screen toward him. Your father's net worth was over $30 million. The penthouse, the shares, they're crumbs. You really think he'd leave your mother with a useless farm out of pity? He hesitated, The thought had crossed his mind more than once, especially when he couldn't sleep. But each time he pushed it away. She's just settling down, Sophie. Let it go. Sophie's lips curved into a knowing smirk. No, Michael. That farm is a shell. A front. Old men with money don't leave loose ends. They hide them in places no one bothers to look. She slid another document across the table, a grainy black and white photograph of the Vermont property pulled from some archive. Abandoned, numb. That's storage. A vault. And whatever she's found there, she's keeping quiet. Michael's jaw tightened. She wouldn't hide things from me. Wouldn't she? Sophie leaned back, her voice soft but venomous. She didn't raise you to be poor. But right now, we're drowning. The investors are calling. The house on 5th is one late payment from foreclosure. You think love will save us? He stared at the city lights, each one a reminder of the life he'd built on borrowed time. What do you want me to do? Sophie's eyes gleamed. Find the truth. If she's hiding assets, we have a legal right to disclosure. And if she refuses, she paused, letting the silence fill the room like smoke. We make her talk. 2 weeks later, a manila envelope arrived at Eleanor's mailbox in Vermont. Stamped, sealed, and cruelly polite. Summons to appear. She unfolded the pages carefully, eyes scanning line after line of accusations, concealment of estate assets, failure to disclose holdings, breach of inheritance transparency. Below it, Sophie's signature. Bold, confident, almost proud. Eleanor's hands didn't shake. She read every word, then folded the papers neatly and placed them back inside the envelope. Outside the orchard, swayed in the wind, and the sun dipped low, calm, golden, indifferent to human greed. She made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and smiled not from joy, but from clarity. So, it begins. In New York, Sophie wasn't done. She wanted headlines. She wanted pressure. By the end of the week, whispers had become news articles. Walker family dispute over hidden assets. Mysterious farm. May hold untapped fortune. Photographers camped outside the Vermont gate. Journalists called for statements. Sophie gave interviews, all carefully phrased, dripping in false concern. We only want transparency. Families should be honest about what's left behind. But behind closed doors, she told Michael, once the court forces disclosure, we'll know everything. Michael sat on the edge of their bed, staring at his hands. She's my mother. She's also a trustee now, Sophie snapped. And trustees don't get to keep secrets. He said nothing. Deep down, guilt gnawed at him, but debt was louder. Back at the farm, Eleanor watched the chaos unfold on the evening news. Her photo flashed briefly across the screen, labeled Widow in Question. She sipped her tea, turned off the TV, and reached for her notebook. Each page was filled with notes, dates, scanned copies of deeds and letters. She was documenting everything, every call, every threat, every rumor. Not in fear, in preparation. Because Henry had taught her one rule. The loudest voices burn out fast. The quiet ones outlast them. So she stayed quiet, collected proof, and waited. A few nights later, rain lashed against the farmhouse windows. Thunder rolled through the hills like an omen. Eleanor sat at her desk, reading the summons again this time with a calm that would terrify those who underestimated her. She whispered to the empty room. They think this is about money, but it's about meaning. And they'll learn meaning doesn't surrender. Lightning flashed, illuminating the orchard outside rows of apple trees, standing tall, their roots deep and unseen. Eleanor closed the folder and exhaled slowly. She had weathered storms before, and she knew this one would not drown her. It would reveal who truly belonged to the soil and who merely wanted its gold. The next morning, the Vermont sky cleared, washed clean after a night of thunder. Mist still clung to the orchard, wrapping each branch like memory, refusing to fade. Eleanor stood by the window holding a cup of tea, her gaze fixed on the horizon, the same horizon Henry must have watched when he built all this. The summons lay unopened on the table now. She knew what it said. She also knew fear wouldn't help. What she needed was truth. And truth, Henry always said, begins with knowledge. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. When a deep, familiar voice answered, her chest tightened. "Arthur Grant speaking." "Arthur," she said softly. "It's Eleanor." A pause, the kind that carries both surprise and affection. "Eleanor Walker, it's been a long time." "Too long," she replied. "I need your help. It's about the farm and Henry's will." Within a day, Arthur arrived still tall, though time had silvered his hair and softened his tone. He stepped into the farmhouse with the quiet grace of someone who knew both the law and the weight of grief. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, a stack of papers between them. Arthur adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents she had found. The trust deeds, the folders, the sealed letters. After several minutes of silence, he leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Eleanor," he began, "Henry didn't leave you a farm. He left you a fortress." She frowned gently. "What do you mean?" Arthur tapped one of the pages. "This isn't just property. It's the registered headquarters of a trust, the Walker Freedom Trust. Henry created it 5 years ago, naming you as the sole trustee and beneficiary. It operates independently of the estate, which means—" He looked up, meeting her gaze. "No one, not Michael, not Sophie, not any court, has the authority to demand its division or disclosure." Eleanor's breath caught. "So the lawsuit? Empty. They can make noise, but they can't break structure. Henry built this by design. He foresaw conflict, and he made sure your freedom couldn't be voted away." She closed her eyes, overwhelmed, a wave of gratitude, sorrow and awe all at once. Henry hadn't simply trusted her. He had built a system to prove she could trust herself. Arthur continued, his tone turning almost tender. "There's more. See this clause, activation of full authority after 6 months of demonstrated stewardship." Eleanor leaned forward. "Stewardship. It's Henry's way of saying, before you can use all the trust's resources, you must show the ability to manage them, maintain the land document, financial activity, oversee local operations. After 6 months, full control transfers to you automatically." She smiled faintly. "A final test." Arthur nodded. "A final act of faith." For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of wind brushing through the orchard filled the silence. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "He didn't want me to just inherit wealth. He wanted me to become worthy of it." Arthur smiled. "You already are, but now it's time to prove it. Not to them, to yourself." Over the following weeks, Eleanor transformed the farmhouse into her study. Morning sunlight spilled across open books, scattered ledgers, and legal pads filled with notes. She studied everything: trust law, asset management, sustainable farming, renewable energy leases. Each night she wrote in her journal, not out of fear, but focus. Every number balanced, every record filed, every action intentional. The woman once seen as fragile was becoming methodical, disciplined, quietly powerful. Arthur visited weekly, reviewing her progress with a proud smile. "You're doing more than Henry asked," he told her once. Eleanor replied, "He gave me the map. I'm just learning to walk the path." She also began reaching out to people in town: local farmers, renewable energy experts, small business owners. Piece by piece, she discovered the trust's purpose: to nurture land that could sustain others, not just herself. And as she worked, news from New York continued to swirl: interviews, rumors, criticism. Sophie's voice echoed across headlines: "We only seek fairness." But Eleanor no longer flinched. Each word of doubt became fuel. Each accusation, another reason to stand taller. One evening, Arthur returned with a leather folder in hand. "Eleanor," he said, "I filed our first response to the court. Preliminary documentation from the trust, plus a notice of independent jurisdiction. It's airtight, but I need your signature." She signed without hesitation. Her hand didn't tremble this time. As she closed the pen, she looked up and said, "I used to think strength meant silence. Now I see it's preparation." Arthur smiled. "And you're ready." Later that night, Eleanor stepped outside. The sky was deep and clear, stars resting like promises overhead. She walked toward the orchard, the cool air wrapping around her shoulders like an embrace. She touched the trunk of the oldest apple tree, the one Henry had planted first. Its roots were deep, unseen, but unshakable. She whispered, "You always built things that last, Henry. Now it's my turn." In that moment, the fear faded completely. What remained was purpose and a quiet certainty that storms could be weathered when one's foundation was built on truth. Eleanor turned back toward the farmhouse, its windows glowing softly in the night. Inside waited her notes, her evidence, her resolve. The roots of her freedom were in place. Now it was time to grow. The courthouse stood tall against the morning sky, a monument of marble and memory, echoing with footsteps of those who came to argue truth. Eleanor stood at its entrance, her gloved hand steady around a leather folder. She had dressed in navy, not for battle, but for dignity. The wind brushed against her hair as she looked up at the pillars and whispered, "All right, Henry, time to keep my promise." Inside the courtroom buzzed with tension. Reporters sat in the back row, pens, ready eyes hungry. Sophie walked in first, heels clicking, expression sharp, flanked by a sleek-suited attorney. Michael followed half a step behind, shoulders tense, gaze lowered. Eleanor turned when she felt his presence. For a moment, mother and son locked eyes. He looked away first. The judge entered robes, sweeping gavel striking once. All rise. Everyone stood, then sat. Sophie's lawyer began with precision, voice smooth and rehearsed. "Your Honor, we are here today to address the concealment of inherited assets. Our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Walker, believe that Mrs. Eleanor Walker has knowingly withheld financial holdings, specifically the property known as the Vermont Farm, believed to contain undisclosed investments in monetary instruments." Each word was an accusation wrapped in civility. Eleanor sat still. Her lawyer, Arthur Grant, waited patiently. He had seen storms before. He knew the power of silence. Sophie's attorney continued, "We request that the court compel full disclosure of said holdings and, if applicable, enforce equitable division under estate law." The judge turned his gaze toward Eleanor. "Mrs. Walker, do you wish to respond?" Arthur rose. "Yes, Your Honor." He opened the folder, revealing neat stacks of documents sealed and notarized. "What my client possesses is not an estate asset, but a legally established independent entity, the Walker Freedom Trust, created by Mr. Henry Walker 5 years prior to his passing. It is separate from his estate, funded independently, and bound by clauses recognized under state and federal law." He stepped closer, handing copies to the clerk. "Here are the formation records, trustee appointments, and financial disclosures. All notarized, all registered. The Vermont property serves as the trust's operational base, not an inheritance subject to division." The judge scanned the documents, brow furrowing, lips pursed. After several quiet minutes, he nodded once. "The evidence is clear. The Walker Freedom Trust is a distinct legal entity outside the jurisdiction of a state division. This court cannot compel its disclosure or redistribution." A murmur swept through the room. Sophie's eyes widened, disbelief curdling into anger. She stood abruptly. "So she gets everything. My husband gets crumbs, and she hides behind paperwork." Sophie, Michael whispered, tugging her sleeve. But she shook him off, voice rising. "You think this is justice? She's manipulating all of us. She's stolen what rightfully belongs to the family." Eleanor didn't flinch. She rose, slowly, turned toward her daughter-in-law, and spoke with quiet weight. Each word a stone laid on the ground, steady and final. "I didn't take anything, Sophie. I kept what your father-in-law entrusted. What he built, not for greed, but for meaning." Her voice did not tremble. It did not need to. She looked at Michael next, her eyes softer, filled with something heavier than anger, sorrow. "Your father left you wealth, but he left me roots, and I will not let anyone tear them up." The room fell silent. Even Sophie's rage faltered under the calm. The judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Walker, please return to your seat. The court acknowledges the validity of your claim. Unless new evidence arises, this matter is closed." He struck the gavel. "One final note. The court advises both parties to seek reconciliation outside these walls. The law settles ownership, not hearts." The sound echoed like thunder across marble. Sophie gathered her papers with trembling hands, her fury smoldering in silence. Michael sat motionless, eyes fixed on the floor. Eleanor turned to Arthur. "Thank you," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Henry did the hard part. You're just walking his path." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Then I'll walk it to the end." Outside the courthouse, the air felt sharper, not colder, but clearer. Reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Walker, do you have a comment? Will you reconcile with your son?" Eleanor paused at the top of the stairs, looked at the flashing cameras, and simply said, "Not everything needs to be divided to be fair. Some things were meant to be kept whole." Then she turned, walked down the steps, and into the waiting car. As the city blurred past the window, Eleanor allowed herself one deep breath, not victory, not pride, but release. In her lap, she held Henry's letter, now worn at the edges from being read too many times. She whispered, "We passed the first test, Henry. But I know storms don't end after the first strike." The sky above New York was overcast, clouds gathering like witnesses. But this time, Eleanor was ready. She knew where her strength came from. And no accusation, no voice, no storm could take that away. The verdict had been rendered. The law had spoken. But greed, once lit, does not go quietly. In a penthouse high above New York, Sophie paced across marble floors, heels clicking like the ticking of a countdown clock. Her reflection glared back from the glass, sharp, restless, unsatisfied. She had lost in court, but in her mind, no loss was ever final. Not when secrets still lingered in shadows. On the coffee table lay photos, the Vermont farmhouse, the orchard, the endless fields. She stared at them with a hunter's focus. "A trust can't exist without assets," she whispered. "And assets always leave a trail." Michael sat on the sofa, head in his hands. "Sophie, please, it's over." She turned sharply. "Over. You think that woman's living off apples and air. She's our mother. She's a gatekeeper," Sophie snapped. "And I'm done waiting for her to hand us crumbs." Without another word, she grabbed her coat and keys. "If she won't open this door, I'll open it myself." The drive to Vermont stretched long and silent. Rain swept across the windshield, blurring the edges of the world. Sophie's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with every passing mile. The GPS faltered, the road narrowed, but the thought in her mind stayed clear. Whatever Eleanor was hiding tonight, she'd uncover it. When the farmhouse came into view, moonlight spilled across its roof, serene, unassuming. Sophie parked behind the orchard, headlights off. The only sound was the hum of crickets and her own heartbeat. She slipped on gloves, circled the porch, and found the back door. It wasn't locked. "Of course," she murmured, trusting to the end. The hinges creaked softly as she stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of wood and apples. Shadows stretched long across the hallway. Her flashlight cut through the darkness. She moved from room to room, study, kitchen, parlor, each one too ordinary, too quiet. Then near the back hall, her beam caught a faint seam in the floorboards. Kneeling, she brushed away dust and found a small iron ring embedded in the wood. She pulled. A panel lifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending into black. A hidden cellar. Her pulse quickened. She descended slowly, the air turning cooler with each step. At the bottom, her light swept across rows of dusty bottles, a wine cellar. But something was off. The wall at the far end wasn't stone like the others. It was metal, and it had a keypad. Sophie stepped closer, running her fingers along its surface. A faint smudge revealed the digits, most often pressed. She smiled. Henry Walker. Predictable old man. She tried a combination, their wedding date. Nothing. Then she frowned, remembering Eleanor's birthday. The keypad beeped. Click. The door swung open, revealing a room lined with filing cabinets and sealed folders. A desk stood in the center, papers neatly stacked, the lamp, still faintly warm, as if someone had been here recently. Sophie's breath caught. "What are you hiding down here, Eleanor?" She began pulling files, each one more shocking than the last. Walker Solar Initiative, preliminary contracts, Green Horizon Agritech, shareholder agreement, EcoTrust Renewables, equity allocation, confidential, diagrams of solar grids, land surveys, renewable energy projections, not relics of the past, but blueprints for the future. Sophie's eyes widened, This isn't retirement. This is an empire. She pulled out her phone, snapping photo after photo. Let's see how much these investors will pay for a peek. Each flash lit the room like lightning. She was too focused to notice the small red dot glowing above the desk, the unblinking eye of a hidden camera. Miles away, in a quiet farmhouse, lit only by a reading lamp, Eleanor stirred her tea. Her tablet buzzed once, a soft chime. She glanced at the notification. Security alert, unauthorized access. Cellar chamber. Her heart stilled, but her hands didn't shake. Henry had warned her. People reveal themselves when they think no one's watching. She opened the live feed. On the screen, Sophie moved through the secret room, rifling through documents, phone flashing, again and again. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but understanding. So this is how far you'll go. She reached for her phone and dialed. Arthur, it's Eleanor. I need to file a report, federal level. Intellectual property theft, attempted breach of trust. Arthur's voice, calm and measured. Do you have evidence? Eleanor looked at the screen, where Sophie was now pocketing a folder. More than enough. Down in the cellar, Sophie zipped her coat triumphant. Her phone buzzed an email draft, already halfway sent to a contact labeled Investor Group East. Subject, Confidential Asset Insight. She hit attach photos, uploading one by one. Then a sound. A soft mechanical click from above. The cellar door sealed shut. Sophie froze. The flashlight flickered. A small screen on the wall lit up text, scrolling across in plain white letters. Access recorded. Security alert sent. Her face drained of color. No. She ran to the keypad, typing frantically. Invalid. 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 Above her, the old farmhouse stood silent, serene, almost watchful. By the time Sophie reached the porch again, dawn had begun to rise, painting the orchard in pale gold. A black SUV waited at the edge of the property, Arthur stepping out beside two federal agents. Sophie stopped, breath shallow, coat still bulging with stolen files. Arthur met her eyes, expression unreadable. You should have known, Sophie. Some doors aren't meant to be forced open. One agent stepped forward. Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us. Sophie tried to speak, but no words came. The sun broke through the clouds, blinding her for a moment. For the first time, she realized she hadn't just walked into someone's home. She had walked into a trap built from foresight and trust. Inside the farmhouse, Eleanor watched from the window, silent. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply whispered, "Justice doesn't shout. It remembers." The orchard swayed gently in the wind, petals drifting across the grass like falling notes. A quiet applause for the woman who never needed to raise her voice to win. Morning broke, not with birdsong, but with the low hum of engines. By the time Sophie stepped outside, the farmhouse was surrounded. Black jackets, emblems gleaming under the early light. FBI? No more running, no more pretending. She froze at the porch breath, caught between shock and disbelief. Agents approached calmly, not cruelly, as if this moment was inevitable. Mrs. Walker, one of them said, "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of unlawful entry, attempted misappropriation of intellectual property, and breach of trust security." Sophie's lips parted, but no words came. Behind her eyes, the flashes of last night, the photos, the hidden room, the screen that glowed. Access recorded, all replayed in silence. Her phone still in her pocket, buzzed once a message unsent. Too late. They led her to the car. The orchard swayed behind her like a jury of witnesses, ancient and unyielding. In New York, the news spread faster than apology. Walker family scandal deepens, FBI investigation, confirms breach at Vermont estate. At the Walker Holdings office, the boardroom was heavy with whispers. Michael arrived late, his face pale, steps uncertain. The chairman looked at him gravely. "Michael, the press is relentless. The shareholders are calling for action. We need distance." Michael's voice cracked. "Distance? Effective immediately. You're relieved of your duties as managing director. Until further notice." He didn't argue. Couldn't. He just nodded, removed his badge, and placed it gently on the table. In his reflection on the glass wall, he saw not a son or a leader, but a man who'd stood silent too long beside greed. At the federal office, Sophie sat across from two investigators in a sterile room. No glamour here, no charm left to wield. They placed the tablet before her, pressed play. On screen herself, breaking in, searching, photographing. The lens had seen everything. The angle, the timestamps, the evidence flawless. These were recorded by the estate's internal security, the agent said. Do you deny this is you? Sophie stared at the screen, her reflection trembling in the glass. Each flash of the camera now looked like a confession. Her voice, once sharp as glass, cracked into something small. I just wanted what was mine. The agent leaned forward. And you thought stealing it would make it yours. Silence. She dropped her gaze. The fight had drained out of her. Not because of the law, but because the truth had stopped waiting. Days later, the courtroom filled again, not with whispers this time, but with judgment. Sophie stood before the bench, hands clasped, eyes hollow. The judge's tone was measured, firm, final. Mrs. Sophie Walker, the evidence presented leaves no room for doubt. You unlawfully entered private property, attempted to distribute protected intellectual assets, and violated federal trust statutes. He paused, the weight of silence pressing down. This court sentences you to 3 years of probation, under federal supervision, a monetary fine of $500,000, and a permanent ban from holding executive or fiduciary positions. A gasp rippled through the room. Michael closed his eyes. The gavel struck. Once, twice. The sound echoed like the closing of a vault. Sophie didn't cry. She just stared ahead, past the judge, past the walls, past the woman who had never once shouted, yet had defeated her completely. Eleanor sat quietly at the back. No triumph, no cruelty, just truth. As Sophie was escorted out, their eyes met for a brief moment. And in that silence, Sophie finally saw what she'd missed all along, that power never came from possession. It came from restraint. Outside, Michael waited by the courthouse steps. The same marble he once walked with pride now felt like a reckoning. He saw his mother approach, calm, poised, the weight of sorrow and strength balanced in her eyes. He tried to speak, but words tangled in guilt. I didn't stop her. I thought. Eleanor raised a hand. You thought silence would protect you. It never does. Michael swallowed hard, eyes burning. I lost everything. She shook her head. No, son. You lost what was never yours to begin with. But what's still yours is the chance to begin again. For the first time, he looked at her, not as a source of wealth, but as a mirror of grace. Later that evening, Eleanor and Arthur sat by the farmhouse window. Sunlight stretched long across the orchard, golden and forgiving. Arthur spoke first. You've done what few could. You fought without hatred. Eleanor smiled faintly. The law isn't here to avenge. It's here to remind. Arthur nodded. Remind of what? She looked toward the fields, roots, deep branches, steady, and said that justice doesn't shout, and that freedom without limits turns to ruin. The law doesn't take sides, it teaches them. Outside, the apple blossoms trembled in the wind, scattering white petals like small verdicts, soft, final, and fair. In the weeks that followed, reporters moved on. Headlines, faded and quiet, returned to Vermont. The farmhouse stood as it always had, not as a fortress, but as a teacher. Michael visited, often helping in the orchard, learning more from silence than he ever had from ambition. Sophie, bound by probation, began volunteer work under supervision, her name no longer feared, but humbled. And Eleanor, in her calm, carried no anger, only understanding. Because she knew law doesn't seek revenge. It draws the line so the world remembers where right ends and wrong begins. As dusk settled, Eleanor closed her journal, whispering to the empty room. Thank you, Henry. You built the walls. I just learned how to stand within them. The house creaked softly in approval, and somewhere beyond the fields, a single bird sang, not of victory, but of peace, born through truth. Autumn had deepened in Vermont. The air was cool, crisp, scented with earth and apples. Rows of trees bowed under the weight of fruit branches, heavy yet graceful, like time itself had learned to bend without breaking. Eleanor stood in the orchard, basket in hand, trimming the last of the season's harvest. Each apple she plucked was a memory, some sweet, some bruised, all hers. She didn't hear the car at first. The gravel crunching under tires. The slow creak of a door opening. But when she turned, she saw a familiar figure standing at the gate, hesitant shoulders, slumped eyes full of something softer than pride. Michael. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, as if waiting for permission to step back into her world. Eleanor set down her basket. "You came." He nodded, voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." She smiled gently. "You're my son, Michael. I may not always agree with you, but I'll always see you." The words broke something in him, or maybe mended it. He took a step closer, then another, until the distance between them was small enough for truth to cross. "I'm sorry, Mom." Simple, honest, trembling. Eleanor nodded, once eyes soft. "I know." Silence settled. But it was a different kind now. Not heavy, not sharp. Just quiet, like soil after rain. After a long breath, she gestured toward the orchard. "Come, help me finish what your father started." That afternoon, mother and son worked side by side beneath the amber light. Michael climbed ladders, filling crates with fruit, while Eleanor sorted them below. Every motion, every word stitched something back together. They laughed once softly, when a gust of wind knocked a cluster of apples onto Michael's head. He caught one mid-air, grinning sheepishly. "Guess they still remember me." Eleanor chuckled. "Of course. You used to climb those trees more than you studied." He looked up, eyes tracing the branches. "I remember. Dad would lift me onto his shoulders to reach the top." For a moment, the orchard didn't feel old. It felt alive, a bridge between what was and what could still be. Later, they moved to the barn, mending wooden beams and cleaning stalls. The air smelled of hay and cedar. Michael hammered nails into place, while Eleanor swept sawdust into neat piles. Between tasks, he paused and looked around. "It's strange. All these years I thought success was about reaching higher. But standing here, I see it's about holding on." Eleanor rested a hand on the beam. "Your father used to say, roots matter more than branches. A tree that forgets its roots eventually falls." Michael lowered his eyes. "I forgot. I chased everything he warned me about. Money, status, approval, and I lost what mattered." She stepped closer, brushing the dust from his sleeve. "You didn't lose it, Michael. You just walked too far. The roots were waiting." He swallowed hard, voice breaking. "I don't deserve forgiveness." Eleanor shook her head gently. "Forgiveness isn't earned. It's given. Like sunlight." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of leaves rustling, a quiet applause for what was being rebuilt, not with tools, but with understanding. As the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch steps, baskets of apples beside them, the sky painted gold and rose. Michael leaned back, eyes on the horizon. "I used to think Dad built all this for the world to see. But it wasn't about, that was it?" Eleanor smiled. "No, he built it so we'd remember who we are." Michael's gaze dropped to his hands, calloused again, but this time by work that healed instead of harmed. "I see it now. I forgot what you and Dad were trying to teach me. You didn't build wealth. You built worth." She reached over, taking his hand. "And now you're learning to build again." He nodded, eyes glistening. "With you, Mom, if you'll let me stay." She squeezed his hand. "Home is a place that never asks permission. It only waits." As night settled, the farmhouse glowed with light. The sound of dinner plates, the scent of apple pie, baking laughter threading softly through the rooms. Michael set the table while Eleanor stirred a pot on the stove. For the first time in a long time, they didn't speak of loss or law, but of small things. The harvest, the neighbors, the orchard's new saplings. Peace had a sound, she realized. It was this. A son returned not with excuses, but with humility. When they sat to eat, Michael looked around the old kitchen, his voice steady, grateful. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Eleanor smiled. "Mothers don't give up. We just wait for the season to turn." Outside, the stars began to appear one by one, steady and patient. The same way forgiveness finds its way home. 1 year later, the Vermont farm looked nothing like the quiet refuge it once was. The orchard still bloomed, but now paths wound between newly built greenhouses and small solar panels glinting beneath the autumn sun. Banners fluttered in the breeze. Walker Legacy Foundation. Inauguration Day. Guests filled the courtyard. Neighbors, students, local farmers, business leaders, each gathered not to witness wealth, but purpose. The farmhouse porch had become a stage draped with ivy and lined with flowers. A wooden sign read, "Growing Roots, Growing Futures." Eleanor stood before them, her posture steady, eyes bright with calm pride. Michael stood beside her, and in the front row sat Arthur, smiling like a proud mentor, watching a promise fulfilled. When the applause settled, Eleanor stepped forward, hands clasped gently. 1 year ago, this land was simply a farm, a memory my husband left behind. Today, it becomes a foundation, a future we build together. Her voice carried over the crowd, quiet, yet strong, every word planted with care. The Walker Legacy Foundation will serve 3 missions. First, scholarships to support students in agricultural studies so they may continue the work of nurturing both land and community. Second, innovation. Grants to help small farmers and green startups grow sustainable projects that heal the earth instead of exhausting it. And third, education workshops, training and mentorships for those who believe prosperity begins with purpose. Applause rose again, but Eleanor simply smiled, nodding with gratitude. When the ceremony concluded, reporters gathered microphones, extended like curious branches. A young journalist stepped forward, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Walker, with the value of this property and the trust's assets, many wondered why not sell and retire. Why turn it into a foundation?" Eleanor paused, eyes sweeping across the orchard sunlight, catching on the apples. The barn restored the students, mingling with farmers. Then she looked back, her voice serene, deliberate. "Because this isn't a commodity. It's a lesson. My husband didn't build this for profit. He built it for purpose. To remind us that the richest soil grows people, not possessions." A hush followed, then soft applause, deeper this time, not polite, but moved. Arthur whispered to Michael, "She's not just protecting a legacy. She's redefining it." Michael smiled, pride and humility mingled. "She always has." As the guests drifted toward the orchard for the luncheon, Eleanor took a quiet walk along the edge of the property. The sound of laughter carried through the wind, children chasing each other between the trees, volunteers setting tables beneath the blossoms. She stopped near the old bench where Henry used to sit, the one they'd restored together. On the seat, a white envelope waited unmarked, except for her name written in a hand she hadn't seen in months. She glanced around. At a distance, a figure stood by the gate, still hesitant. Sophie. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, time slowed. Sophie didn't move closer. She simply nodded once. A small gesture, humble and heavy, then turned and walked down the gravel path, leaving the crunch of her footsteps behind. Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside a single page. "Eleanor, I came here today, not to claim anything, but to return something understanding. You didn't take from us. You taught us. And though I learned late, I did learn. Thank you for protecting what we were too blind to see. I'm sorry. Sophie." Eleanor read it twice, then folded it gently, tucking it into her coat pocket. No tears, only a quiet exhale, like a door closing softly behind forgiveness. "Good girl," she whispered, not in triumph, but in peace. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the hills, lanterns flickered on across the orchard. The guests gathered once more for the final toast. Michael raised his glass, voice clear. "To my father, who built the roots. To my mother, who kept them alive. And to every seed planted here, may it grow into something greater than we ever imagined." Glasses clinked, laughter rippled, and the music began, a soft melody of strings and wind blending with the rustle of leaves. Eleanor stood a little apart, watching faces lit by lantern light. Young students, hopeful eyes. Local farmers, calloused hands but open hearts. Sophie gone now, but perhaps finally free from her own hunger. Henry's dream had not ended with him. It had only changed shape from a will to a trust, from a trust to a movement, from a movement to a lesson. What's built with love cannot be stolen, only shared. As the stars emerged, Eleanor whispered to the night, "We did it, Henry. We turned inheritance into impact." The orchard rustled back in reply, carrying her words into the dark. Not an ending, but a continuation. Evening settled softly over Vermont, the kind of twilight that didn't fall, but arrived gently like an old friend. The orchard shimmered in golden light, each leaf a note in the song of the wind. The farmhouse windows glowed warm and steady, as if keeping watch over all that had been rebuilt. Eleanor sat by the window of her study, the same desk where it had all begun, the first letter, the first plan, the first decision to stand. Now beneath her hand, a different letter unfolded her journal. The pen glided across the page, not with urgency, but with grace. "I used to think inheritance was something you receive. Now I know it's something you become." She paused, gazing out at the fading light, where the trees stretched toward the sky like quiet survivors. Then she wrote again, steady and sure. "I didn't lose to anyone. I simply refused to let injustice win." The words sat there neither bitter nor proud, just true. For a long moment, Eleanor listened to the whisper of the wind against the shutters, to the steady rhythm of her own breath. This land had seen storms court's reckonings, yet tonight it knew only stillness. Outside footsteps crunched along the gravel path. Michael approached a small bouquet in his hands, wildflowers from the edge of the orchard, stems uneven petals, imperfect but gathered with care. He stopped at the porch, breathing in the familiar scent of apples and cedar, then stepped quietly inside. Eleanor looked up as he entered. "You brought flowers," he smiled. "Not from the store this time." She chuckled softly. "Those are always the best kind." He placed them in a small vase, then sat across from her, eyes wandering around the room, the shelves of books, the maps, the framed photo of his parents, young and laughing. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you've done, for what you've taught me." Eleanor tilted her head. "And what did I teach you?" Michael took a breath, eyes bright in the lamplight. "That wealth isn't measured by what we keep, but by what we create. That love isn't silence, and that peace takes work." She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Then you've learned what matters." They sat together for a while, saying little. Words weren't needed. The air between them was full, not with guilt, not with regret, but with understanding. When Michael stood to leave, he lingered at the door, turning back once more. "Dad would have been proud." Eleanor looked at him, eyes gentle but firm. "He'd be proud of you, for finding your roots." Michael smiled, nodded, and stepped into the twilight, the bouquet's scent still lingering in the room. Later, Eleanor returned to her journal, adding one final line. "True freedom isn't granted by courts or trusts. It's earned one honest choice at a time." She closed the book, blew out the lamp, and sat in the hush that followed. Outside, the stars began to bloom, slow and deliberate, across the velvet sky. The wind brushed through the orchard, carrying the murmur of branches, a language only those who've endured can understand. Eleanor rose, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. The horizon glowed faintly, the last breath of sunset fading into night. She stood there, breathing in the cool air, feeling the earth steady beneath her feet. The same ground that had tested her sheltered her, and at last restored her. For a long while she said nothing. Then softly, to the quiet world that had witnessed everything, she whispered, "The truest inheritance isn't gold or land. It's freedom earned through truth." She paused, eyes closing, as the wind brushed her face, carrying the scent of apple blossoms. "And peace," she whispered again, "is the smartest revenge." In the stillness, no applause followed, only the sound of the wind and the steady heartbeat of a life made whole. Tomorrow, the world would move again. Students arriving at the foundation, farmers tending fields, Michael leading new projects with hands that once only reached for more. But tonight belonged to quiet victories. To a woman who chose law over rage, roots over walls, peace over power. The stars shimmered like blessings, and somewhere deep in the orchard, a lone apple fell not in loss, but in completion. And as the earth received it, the farm, the trust, the legacy. All of it exhaled the same simple truth. What's built with love can never be taken. What's guarded by peace never needs defense. Eleanor smiled, turned toward the door, and stepped back into the home that freedom built.